Welcome to the Small Town Creepy podcast. I am Dex, your guide to horror media. Tonight we are interviewing Asa with Backwards Tabletop, talking about their Kickstarter and any upcoming fun post-apocalyptic mayhem that they might be bringing to us. Asa, can you please introduce yourself and Backwards Tabletop for us?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Asa. As Dex said, I'm one of the creators for Backwards Tabletop and just a lover of all things tabletop games and a big fan of horror, too. As Dex said, we have a game that's currently running on Kickstarter, Backwards Regional American Gothic Horror. It's actually the series of books up until this point. So we have 4 books. Each of them are standalone books, so they have all the rules and what have you that you need to play, but with their own regional settings. And 2 of these regional settings are brand new. They pick up on different regions of the US, and they sort of fall into that genre of American Gothic, picking up on the very specific local color, history, culture of these particular regions, and then bringing in some post-apocalyptic horror elements to bear on that. So sort of taking that regional American Gothic genre and putting it in a post-apocalyptic world. And we only have a couple of days left before our campaign is over. We are so close at the time of recording this. We're right on the edge of funding. In fact, we're over 90%, and we're just trying to creep towards that final goal. So hopefully, if you're listening to this anytime after October 2023, hopefully we've successfully funded. But you can find us on itch, any of our games on itch, or Drive-Thru RPG as well.
Fabulous. Now, and I'll be linking all of that below in the description and wherever you find this podcast and over on our blog as well. I love the world that you've created with these games. It is so unique. It is so... I say it's so unique, but it's also so familiar because, this is our backyards for a lot of us that play these games or look into these games. And it sounds flippant to ask, but where did you come up with this idea? What inspired you to be like, I'm going to do post-apocalyptic Southern Gothic? I mean, not all of it Southern, but regional, I guess, Gothic horror games.
Yeah. Well, I think there are more than a few things, but we started with Southern Gothic, and that was sort of where it spawned from there. And I think when you're thinking about different types of regional Gothic in the US, a lot of folks, the most prominent one that they might think of would probably be Southern Gothic. You think of authors like Faulkner or Flannery O'Connor being sort of these big Southern Gothic authors, or I think Michael McDowell did the Blackwater Saga, not as classic as an author there. Sherry Priest, and maybe other things that folks maybe more likely have heard of too, but it's sort of in pop culture, like the Swamp Thing and like the Alan Moore graphic novels and things too, or Harrow County, one of my favorites in graphic novels. Southern Gothic is it's just this really expansive genre that took a life of its own. And at the time, I had actually moved from the so Alex, who's sort of my creative partner at Backwards Tabletop, both of us had moved to different parts of the U.S. at this point in time, and we were sort of creating a game as a way of staying in touch with one another. And I had actually taken a job down in southern Arkansas. I was right across the border from Louisiana. And And while I was down there, we're talking about different genres for games. And one of the things that I was thinking to myself was I'd really be interested in sort of a Southern Gothic genre, but wanting to do it right. So sort of, yeah, it's being able to speak to a lot of the fictional elements of Southern Gothic on one hand, but also speak to the reality of these places too. And that was sort of how Backwater was initially born. And we wanted to separate it from our real world context and put it into a post apocalyptic context and allow people to make it weird and start to reimagine some of the places that they lived in. So that's where we started. And then after we had funded our first game, we actually had on Kickstarter, we had funded Backwater. We had somebody reach out to us, and at the time we're sort of talking about, maybe we'll do another game. What do we want to do here? Somebody reached out and they said, "Hey, will you start a Discord for your game? I'd be interested in chatting with other people about the world and the system." We said, "Sure." And as we pulled together the Discord, we're surprised, one, how many people had joined initially, and then two, just how interested they were in imagining their different parts of this post-apocalyptic world. And thinking about, oh, what would happen to this city here, or what would be some of the weird things that we might play up about local culture in our own settings too. And at that time, because Alex and I were already thinking maybe we'll create a second game here, that sort of solidified it for us. And I think from there, we started looking forward, and we had already started to imagine and build out some of these other places in the world, but we decided to systematically approach it. We sort of divided up into what regions we wanted to do. And we're going to take them down systematically. So our second one ended up being in St. Louis and really focuses on Middle America. The theme for that one is you're sort of exploring this abandoned city of St. Louis and discovering old technology, but some of that regional Gothic horror for Middle America ends up appearing in some of the other setting content that you might expect. One of the maybe classic things, think about like Stephen King and Children of the Corn, driving through the Midwest, the Plain States, and you have just miles and miles of corn all around you. And I grew up on a farm in the Midwest originally. And I never found it too creepy, but I was always fascinated how a lot of folks, when they're out in very remote rural areas and stuff, how this could be really a fascinating thing for them too. So we explore things like that in St. Louis. And then our two newest games, we are trying to work on the Southeast, particularly Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. And then the Northeast, especially New England. And we're trying to give those attention and build on some of the fiction, I'd say, that inspired us, the regional Gothic fiction that inspired us for these areas.
That's awesome. It's so funny that you mentioned Michael McDowell, because when I first saw your games, the first thing I thought of was The Elementals by Michael McDowell, which I think encapsulates Southern Gothic really well.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And I was just going to say Blackwater Saga is also great, and one of the things I love about Blackwater Saga, like he takes, and this is something I like about Sherry Priest. If anyone's read any of her work, like The Toll, which is set in Louisiana, but one of the things I love about both of these is they take the Southern Gothic and then they bring Gothic horror elements to play in there too, and in really cool and unique ways. And I think the Blackwater Saga in particular does really cool things with like the history of a family in the South and some of their buried secrets and how they might relate to being a river monster.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love Michael McDowell in that series.
Right. Are those the works that made you want to take this post-apocalyptic concept towards more of a Gothic scenario rather than, say, a cyberpunk or dystopian. Because, like, we see post-apocalypse a lot in media and games, but it's often more cyberpunk. It's often more, or it's dystopian, like the Hunger Games. But you really made it more romantic almost with this Gothic vibe.
Yeah. So I guess there's sort of two threads to unravel there. And on one hand is what elements of the Gothic we ended up playing up, and then why we ended up playing up the post-apocalyptic elements. So I think I can start with maybe the Gothic elements, and like when we think of Gothic and Gothic horror or the Gothic tradition, a lot of times we nowadays a lot of folks say, oh yeah, vampires, Frankenstein, it's Dracula, Frankenstein, all that sort of stuff, thinking about that history of the of fiction and the genre. And but the Gothic tradition is a lot more than that. It's about these dilapidated buildings and the history behind them and their families. And there's always this peculiar relationship with the past. Like the past is often a very scary thing, and there are things in the past that when they become unveiled, that is the truly one of the truly horrifying things that ends up happening in the Gothic. And there's more than that, and a lot of people say the Gothic is sort of this eerie vibe, but it sort of comes out of that, I think, the Castle of Otranto tradition. But American Gothic actually builds off of that. Although I think when we think of American Gothic, we think of something a lot more folksy. And again, we think about sort of small town Gothic. We think about like Twin Peaks, where you get a lot of local color, and you meet really real but unusual people, that sort of stuff. But those are all part of the same tradition, I would say. But we see that sort of Gothic tradition coming up in things like Southern Gothic, where these old castles or abandoned, hermitages and stuff like that from that Romantic and Victorian tradition. Ends up appearing in the Southern Gothic with these old manor houses and family homes and what's happening there. And you can like think of a lot of Faulkner fiction right away when you think of that. So that tradition has always been there. And I think that Gothic horror element has always been there too. Maybe not in a lot of the classics that we like to think of, but I think that's part of what Michael McDowell is building on, and that's part of what we wanted to build on too. So to some extent, yes, we're taking a little bit of that Gothic element from Michael McDowell and Sherry Priest and many others too, but we're trying to build on that longer tradition of Gothic horror. And then the post-apocalyptic side, you mentioned how we take it, and instead of going like cyberpunk sort of things or like an 80s sort of retro future or a really high-tech future, we end up doing sort of a retro future, as you were talking about, how it's a lot more 19th century in the vibe. Clothing is modeled off of the 19th century. The technologies in general are modeled off the 19th century with some exposure to like old world technologies that people have discovered along the way. And some of that post-apocalyptic vibe we're trying to also borrow from that Gothic tradition, which comes out of the Romantic period and the Victorian period, and even thinking about our classic Southern Gothic horror and how a lot of that's coming out of the 19th century, early 20th century, especially though. But so we're trying to bring in more of a historical vibe. So the apocalypse happened, and we sort of regressed in terms of our access to technology, and in many other ways too. And then I think there might be think there's one other point that I was trying to think of why we went back in time a little bit for what we're thinking about with the post-apocalyptic, but it's slipping my mind here. So those are some of the things that we're thinking of as we ended up developing this setting.
So many fantastic authors just in like those first few minutes. Do you have like a reading list or book club for your Backwards lore fans?
I wish. I think we should.
Yeah, you totally should.
Yeah, Alex and I read a lot. Both of us do. We love reading. So I did my PhD in literature originally, and actually when I was in Southern Arkansas, I was a professor at in Magnolia, Arkansas, and in an English department. But I didn't teach horror or anything like that. But that was stuff that I was always interested in. And Alex is in a very, very, I always think this is very cool, but he's an antiquarian by trade, and
Wow.
he deals in historical documents. And his partner is a professor of history, and both of them are very much so into history. But Alex and I both love reading, and that was one of the things that we started off playing tabletop games together because we had mutual friends in the history department, and then Alex and I became much closer friends because we just vibed well, but also we both loved to read and ended up talking about a lot of these books. But some of the books that are on that list, either he or I suggested them to one another. And the one that I'll give a big shout out to, one of my favorite graphic novel series of all time, is Harrow County by Cullen Bunn, and Tyler Crook is the main illustrator and painter for it. And if you've never read that series, it's incredible. It's pretty light on horror. It's not super scary or anything like that. But the art and the stories are just so awesome, and it's a Southern Gothic setting as well.
Fabulous. I will put the books that we do reference in this podcast in the list in the description for reading nerds like myself. Now, so you have mentioned, in the Gothic horror, where the past is scary and things in the past being terrifying, but also wanting to speak to the reality of these places, like especially within Southern Gothic, and a real world context. How much of a discussion was it about how to approach these things with respect to, but also not wanting to include things like the bigotry or historical violence against minority groups that are inherent in a lot of these locations historically?
Yeah. Yep. That was a big discussion pretty early on. And I'd sort of one of the first things that I had done was craft sort of a guiding statement as Alex and I started writing sort of our statement of intent and how we're going to try to, how we're going to handle the racist history of some of the areas that we were writing about, even thinking about what a lot of the landmarks or buildings can even stand for. Like if you, I think everybody knows this, but it's not hard to stumble across a landmark or a building named after somebody who was a quote unquote hero for the South in the Civil War for the Confederacy, and it's more than just that. Even it's sort of it's pervasive, and so it was something that we were trying to be very conscious of, and it's not just for the South either. We think about this in other contexts too. So in Gothic horror, there is sort of the idea of the grotesque, and a lot of times the grotesque treats disabilities, especially physical disabilities, but also things like disfigurement, etc., as being something that is horrifying. and ultimately a negative thing, and really play it up. So we had also drafted up a statement thinking about, okay, how are we going to try to be conscious when developing characters with disabilities in this world, and how are we going to try to not turn them into the grotesque? And there's more than that too. And every time we write a book, we try to be very conscious of that. For Backwater, I had sort of drafted that statement, and Alex and I talked about it, and we wanted to make sure that anybody who wanted to play our games, regardless of their identity, we wanted them to be able to play them comfortably. And for us, that meant not building racism into our setting. And that was one of the reasons that we ended up setting it in a post-apocalyptic world. We were trying to distance ourselves from the present, a little bit further from the history of the setting too. And we wanted to be very clear, there's not racism built into our game. It's not a theme of our game. And again, that's mostly thinking about wanting people, anybody who picks up the game, to be comfortable playing it. And then we also say, give some safety tools in there too. Like if this is something that a table does want to pick up, we want folks to be very conscious about how they handle that. And we give some recommendations on doing so, and just mention, start by having a conversation with your table too. Beyond that, we also had sensitivity readers come in, not just review our statement, but review the entirety of our work. And we've done that for all of our books so far too. So we're trying to be very conscious of it and recognize that these are real world settings, and that these real world settings have history to them, and as do the traditions of fiction in which these settings are from too. And we're trying to be very conscious about how those end up showing up in gameplay, or even more specifically, how we can prevent some of those things that might be triggering for some folks from showing up within gameplay as well.
I love that you all were so conscientious of that, and I appreciate that a great deal, and I'm sure your other players and readers appreciate that as well. So backtracking a little bit, so you've mentioned, I'm trying to figure out which direction I want to go, because I have like a couple more questions I've noted down since you've been talking. You've mentioned Children of the Corn and Twin Peaks. Were there other movies or shows that really heavily influenced your game creation, or was it more books?
I'd say definitely shows too, and again, I just am obsessed with books. I love reading physical books. I love listening to books on audiobook too. And actually, Children of the Corn, I haven't seen the actual movie since I was like a kid, I feel like, or maybe a teenager probably. But I read the short story recently, which is actually really hard to get your hands on. And there's also like a radio drama version for those folks out there that are interested in trying to get it on an audiobook, if you like it like I do. And you can get that for free, which is really nice too. And I just love Stephen King in general. But if we're thinking about TV shows, Twin Peaks is one of my favorite all-time TV shows. And I'm always looking for TV shows that are like Twin Peaks, but many of them just don't live up to it. But Twin Peaks is great, and I think for our games, we try to not just play off that small town vibe, but also really bring in the weird and the bizarre, which David Lynch is so good at and well known for too. Thinking about other movies, I love Stephen King books, and I love movies based on Stephen King's works too, or even just some of the original films. But Stephen King sort of has a special place for me in the history of American Gothic fiction, even though a lot of people may not think of him as an American Gothic writer. They might just think of him as a horror writer. but a lot of his stories are very focused um, on American settings, either specific settings in the U.S. or cross-country trips throughout the U.S., sort of like a modern day, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn sort of approach to things. Like he has The Stand, which is all about different parts in the U.S. And I love The Stand. I haven't been as happy with some of the TV adaptations of it, but the book is great. And that is different, set in different parts of the U.S. and then travels throughout the U.S. The Talisman is another great one, which is all about traveling throughout the U.S. And then The Dark Tower, in many ways, is like traveling through a sort of a post-apocalyptic version of the U.S. too. But you have It, and the It movie, probably more influential and something that I really enjoyed. The original one, I actually haven't seen the new one yet. Is one that I loved. And when you think about New England Gothic horror or New England horror set in New England, Stephen King is sort of premiere for that. And then Storm of the Century was one that my dad had me watch when I was a bit younger, and sort of scared the socks off of me. But I just loved it, and there are a few lines in there which I just cannot forget to this day. And I'm pretty sure that one was he originally wrote that like screenplay or something of it. I don't think it was ever fiction originally too. But in terms of like, I guess more recent types of horror TV shows that I really love, I really like. I'm blanking on his name, the director's name, but he did the remake of The Haunting of Hill House and Turning of the Screw on Netflix. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, and now that you've said it, I can't remember either. You know what? I'm gonna Google. So just go ahead and keep talking. You're fine.
Yeah, you Google it while I'm talking here. And now he's doing the all of the House of Usher.
House of Usher, yeah.
Yeah, and again, he's taking up these sort of classic Gothic horror tales, two of which are very sort of American Gothic and even regional Gothic. The Poe. Fall of House of Usher, and then The Haunting of Hill House, which is the best one of all.
It's
of them.
Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, Mike Flanagan. Thank you. And he is going to do the Stephen King Dark Tower reboot too, or not reboot, but film. But it canceled.
That's
and
exciting.
I don't know, maybe it's in the works. Yeah, I would have loved it.
Yeah, so. I mean, not that long ago, they were talking about a Dark Tower TTRPG. Yeah, and then it fell by the wayside as well, which was heartbreaking because I was so pepped for it. But hopefully, because there's some other stuff going on with, I could geek out about Stephen King all day. I love the work of Stephen King, and you mentioned The Talisman, and I will be forever grateful to you for that, because most people forget The Talisman or don't even know it exists. But it's my favorite. It is my ultimate favorite. Love it. Oh, anyway, I could go all day.
Yeah, I love that one too, and I was just gonna also give a shout out to the sequel, Black House, which two very different books, but I really liked how he transitioned into Black House, and I thought Black House was awesome. And as a second, or just as a standalone book, even too.
I think people who enjoyed The Shining and then Doctor Sleep would enjoy The Talisman and The Black House, especially if you like Stephen King's The Dark Tower, because it's that vibe. But like I said, I could go all day. I could go all day on Stephen King. Love it.
Yeah, I've already gone on too long, I'm sure. So sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. I love it. I'm here for it, but I don't want to like detract from talking about your games, and might have you on just to geek out about Stephen King in a later podcast. That'll be fun.
I'd be happy to.
So you're not alone in making this game. You've got Alex, and then you guys also have like other writers and sensitivity readers and other people helping out and collaborating. What does that co-creation, collaboration work look like for you all? Because I'm always intrigued by that as somebody who makes stuff by themselves. Like, I don't even know how to delegate, much less co-create something. So what does that look like for you all?
Yeah. it can really depend, and it sort of, I think, changes over time too. And we were recently we just did an interview with Tyler Chansey and Tech Raptor, and that was one of the questions that they had asked as well. It can really depend. But first, I'll speak to why we do collaboration. So on one hand, it started off as Alex and I are friends, and I think we both work with each other in really useful ways, where Alex is just this extremely creative person who has like unlimited creative potential and can just unwind these massive amounts of pages all at once. And I'm somebody who's like writes very slow, very detail oriented type of work. And I think that sometimes we might butt heads on our very specific ways of approaching things, but in general, we end up working really well together. Like those things end up complementing each other. We sort of rein in each other or push each other to write in different ways that we might not have previously. But we started bringing in, we didn't bring anyone in for our first book for Backwater, but for our second book, Backroads, we brought in Shay Snow, and they're great. And one of the reasons that we wanted to bring in a third writer at that point in time is we were sort of testing the waters and figuring out, okay, how's this going to work if we bring somebody who isn't as familiar with our world as we might be? What sort of things do we need to do? And Shay Snow, Shay writes for Paizo and has been included on many different Pathfinder and Starfinder projects in the past. They've also been involved in Coyote and Crow, and they're an indigenous writer originally based in Texas, but now they're out in the Northwest. And we brought them out to work with us on this project, in part because, one, they had a ton of experience, but also we were working with, this was our second book, and it was really about Middle America, and we're thinking, and some of the works that we're drawing from inspiration, or even with American Gothic in general, there is sort of a treatment of American Indian characters that often falls along very stereotypical lines, and sort of pitting them against quote unquote civilization. And they are, and I don't like to use the term all that much, but they are quote unquote savages, etc. Or it could be things like they're the last, people presenting them as in this romantic way that is not at all close to reality, and acting as if they're the last of their kind, etc. Lots of these types of stereotypes that come up in American Gothic fiction, and we wanted to bring in Shay because we actually wanted to push up against that, and to have somebody who actually has one of these backgrounds being able to help us create characters and represent them in a way that is on one hand more sensitive, and then two, just better characters in general that either Alex or I would have been able to create. So it started like that. And for our newest projects, we started bringing in folks thinking a little bit more about these regions. And Alex lives in New England, and one of our newest book, Backwoods, is based in New England, so it helped. But we also brought in Jill Poisson, who lives in Providence, and they're a screenwriter over there. But they've also written tabletop games, and they're helping us build out the city of Providence, Rhode Island for the game, which is going to be featured in that book. And then we brought in a couple of different authors to Candace McAfee and Basil Wright for back channels. Both of them live in Florida currently. And some of the things that we're trying to get out of that process or in that collaboration is, a little bit more authentic of an experience, but also bring in some of those very small things where if somebody is actually living in one of these areas and as they read through the book, we want them to be able to pull that out and say, oh my gosh, yes, this is so true, or this is so real, and I want to work this into my game. So you want to bring in some of those fits of inspiration. And in terms of how it works, it can really vary depending on the writer. And a lot of times they mostly start by talking with usually it's me and Alex and then one other writer, and they might talk with us or be on an email chain with us. Some of them might want to chat via Discord. We've jumped on video calls or audio calls or voice calls with some of them too. So it can really depend on the person and what they're interested in. And then a lot of things that we're trying to do is our sort of fictional world that we've created has become pretty expansive. So we're always trying to okay, well, we need to figure out this fire hose situation that we have and try to give them the most essential and important information first. So we'll give them overviews of the projects as well as some of the themes that Alex and I are trying to build out as we're writing. And then some of the things that we'd be hoping that they could build on as a starting point, and then give them resources. We always give them full copies of our other books and adventures and stuff for them to dig through if they need to look anything up or if they want to check in with us. So we end up checking in with them on a regular basis and talk things out as things come up or they have any questions. But a lot of times it just really can vary based on who the contributor is and what sort of collaboration they're looking for too. And I think the last thing I'll note, and I think we're pretty unique in this, although we end up giving guidelines to a lot of folks on what we're looking for, we always try to emphasize, and we do this with artists too, that they ultimately have full creative license. And there is an editing process. So if there is something where this is a little bit too far, this contradicts something else that we've already written, we can talk about that. But and it's a very collaborative process if any of that ever comes up. But we really want them to, we don't want to say, oh yeah, we really want you here to help us create a realistic representation of these regions, but you have to write about these specific things. So we don't want to impose our fictional ideas of these places upon their lived experiences too. So giving them sort of creative license is another really important element that we try to bring to that collaboration.
I love that so much. That's probably why it does feel so real. But just what little bit I've read, and then of course the little bit that we played over in my other podcast, it did feel real. It did feel like, oh, I feel like I've been to this place over. I might have been to what inspired that. I haven't been obviously to this weird post-apocalyptic world. Thankfully, I would not handle it well, but it did feel like like I said, something in our backyards for a lot of us. But it's not just, you guys didn't just make your lore. I mean, we are really into the world and the lore and the world building, but you all created your own mechanics and system. What did that look like creating it? Which came first, and then how did you combine that with the lore?
Yeah, that is a very tricky question. And the truth is, it's a which came first question, the chicken or the egg sort of thing. But in this case, it's and maybe for the chicken too, I don't know. The answer is neither. They came at the same time. And maybe there are different, there are different types of eggs out there. There are different versions of this system when we had originally started it, for example, and different ideas that we had tossed around in the world, but none of them were truly what we ended up with until we combined and tried to tailor the two for one another. So the system started for a couple of different games, and it started off where my tabletop friend group that I played with, and also just some of my friends from college. They really wanted to play Jurassic Park, but in a tabletop world. And I was like, oh, I want to, maybe I'll work on sort of a survival horror game and see if we, how quickly we can pick that up. So that's where it started. And there were other variants along the way as we adapted it for different worlds and had some fun with it. And eventually, I've mentioned the Dark Tower a couple times. You mentioned the Dark Tower. I'm like a Dark Tower nut.
I love it. I love it. I'm here for it.
I've done several trips on around the Dark Tower, but I had a friend group and one of my friends who I'd done my PhD with, he also loved the Dark Tower series, and so did his dad, and one of his friends had read a couple of the books. We pulled together a group, and they wanted to play a Dark Tower tabletop role-playing game. And that system sort of that I had created for Jurassic Park ended up morphing for Dark Tower, and we played for a long time. Originally, I was going to try to create a Dark Tower-based tabletop role-playing game, although there are many good sort of variants on that nowadays that folks can play too, that I've really enjoyed. But eventually those sort of some core pieces from that came together at the same time that Alex and I were trying to think of a game that we could create together. And in particular, some of the survival elements from these games came in, and some of the horror elements came into the game too. And then a pretty robust sort of tactical combat system, which we don't usually get to preview in actual plays. It's more the type of game that you play on the table, and it's a lot more, in my opinion, can be a lot more fun if you have the map out and can do some of the more tactical elements for it too. Although we have theater of the mind options for combat in the game books as well. So we started sort of tailoring different elements of the system, creating new ones to match some of the things that we were interested in pulling out from this setting. And then Alex and I, a couple of the things that really came out of this collaboration and in thinking about the new setting is we wanted to create really unique characters for a couple of different reasons. On one hand, for me, horror and horror fiction is all about the characters a lot of times. Like, for something to be scary, I don't know how much you've read or thought about this yourself, and many folks probably have similar thoughts too, but a lot of it's about identification. We're identifying with these characters. In a lot of cases, we're putting ourselves in their shoes. And we see that in film in a couple of ways. Like, a lot of times they'll show a character's face and you'll see their direction that their eyes are looking, and then they'll cut the shot and suddenly you're looking from their perspective, right? So they're trying to condition you to realize what that character is looking at, and then they're putting you in their shoes. And that's one of the many things that you can see in great horror films. And that makes you really nervous. Oh, they're trying to see in the dark. They're in a basement of this creepy house. Maybe it's soundproof. And anyway, bad joke there. But then there's in like horror fiction, a lot of times it's like using first person language or suddenly shifting. So you're thinking and seeing from that character's perspective. They're always inviting you to think from the character's perspective. And for us, when we were thinking about the horror game, we really wanted to make it so folks are invested in these characters. And that can happen in a bunch of different ways, but through character creation, we really wanted to make it so that when folks are creating their characters, they're investing some time in it. They can really customize things, but it also gives them ideas or helps them orient themselves within the setting too. So they don't feel like, okay, here's a character I created, now I have to plop it into this post-apocalyptic setting that I'm not too familiar with. So we try to build some of that in there. And then other parts where we see that in tabletop games is okay, when you have lower health and you're in a dangerous situation, your choices suddenly really matter. And the character's choices become your choices because those stakes are amped. So suddenly you're identifying with that character a bit. You're thinking from that character's perspective, and that facilitates the role play. So we were trying to do that with the system in a couple of different ways, um, and yeah, so that was at least some of the horror elements that ended up coming out. And then the other thing we wanted to build out on, which is part of American Gothic, but also fits in a post-apocalyptic setting sometimes too, is we just wanted folks to be able to make their characters weird and imagine this very weird setting and go wild with it too. So we're trying to build some of that into the game and the character creation process as well. So they came at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Oh my gosh, you said so much. I was like, oh, I have comments. But yeah, I wanted to let you talk. I would love to play your Dark Tower TTRPG. Like, that sounds awesome. But I agree with what you're saying, and I have thought a lot about the fact that, like, when we're reading horror or watching horror, it does matter about the characters. That's the key thing. It's the reason why, like, John Carpenter's Halloween bothered people so much, is because he lingered with the perspective of the killer more than any other character, making you have to identify with the killer rather than with the victims, and that's why it was so mind-blowing at the time. It still is. It's why it's classic. But in my interview with Barney of Parable Games, he said something that is still sticking with me now, is that horror only matters when you share it. And I'm paraphrasing. I know it's not word for word exactly what it said, but yeah, that's when it matters. And it's when you share it, when you have connections. And I could see what you're saying with, like, your character creation and your character building, connecting with your character. I was laughing with Ashley when we were preparing our characters for your game. I think I spent as long making my character as we did playing.
That's funny.
But
and it can really depend too, for anyone going through that like, people can whip through it if they want, but and we hope that it facilitates us too. We want people to care and spend a lot of time building out their characters and coming up with backstories and or picking those things that make their characters unique too.
Yeah, but I felt like I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I spent all this time making a character for a one shot, what a waste. It felt like that was part of playing. I was enjoying the process immensely. I found myself really thinking about this world and who I would be in it, and what would this look like as far as their history combined with the history of the location. Because when you look at the character creation design for back channels, you have so many things about these locations and the classes situation of, like, lower class or upper class or working class or whatever, built into this world, and what would that look like. And by the time we were done, Ashley and I were like, had a full-blown Princess Bride back situation built for our characters, and I was like, this is a one-shot, what are we doing? But it was so fun.
Well, and I loved your characters too. And if for those who are listening, if you haven't listened to the game yet, to listen to it just for Dex's and Ashley's characters, because they are, and Bob's character.
Oh yeah, Bob's
too.
great.
But speaking of you and Ashley in particular, your characters were just so great. And I do feel like because we've had a number of actual plays, and I think we're probably maybe over 20 at this point in time, different actual plays out there from some of our games, or at least episodes. We might have about 20. And in so many of them, the characters are just so good. And part of that is because we're playing with folks who are really good, who are really good performers, like you and Ashley. But I also like to imagine that some of these characters are also interesting, like their backstories are interesting, etc., because something about the character creation process maybe spoke to those great performers along the way and helped them come up with those ideas too. So I don't know if anyone has
Definitely.
the time to check out some of our games and some of the really amazing characters that we've had in them.
I think it definitely is that because in other games, especially one particular one that is incredibly popular within TTRPGs, it's very stat based. And you don't even really think too much about the history of it unless you as a person are just leading that way. It's very easy to get into like min-maxing and overpowering a character and focusing just on stats or just on equipment and things like that. Whereas your character creation thing, it was very lore based, it was very regional based, and it was very what does this person look like in the context of everything going on in this area? But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was reading like a textbook on the world that I was going to have to end up in. But because each question is laid out just in little blocks, and you could very much just follow along, almost like a choose your own adventure, just in character creation. It was fabulous. I loved that. Definitely check that out. I just think it's so fun. Hey. Okay, so you have the Kickstarter, and then what does after the Kickstarter look like for you all? Are you all just focusing on just getting this done, or do you already have like new games like planned and prepped and things like that?
We have a couple of ideas, uh, and it really depends on where we end up with this Kickstarter. So again, at the point of us talking here, we are like 90% funded. Tomorrow is sort of the 48-hour mark, and a lot of times there's a big boost as Kickstarter sends out reminders to those who are following the campaign, and usually there's a boost. So hopefully that'll help us get over that hump and get us in the funded region. But even if it doesn't, we have plans for what we would do in that particular instance too. So that's part of why it depends, because the order of operations could change based off of how the next 48 hours go. Some of the things that we are planning on working on, we've had adventures that we've written for each of these books, and including the new books we have. I'd say, I think 3 or 4 adventures written for each of them, but we haven't published them yet. Originally, they're going to be part of a stretch goal. We had some other authors who are from these regions of the new books for both Back Channels and Backwoods who are going to write some adventures for it. And I'm guessing we may not hit those stretch goals. So one of our plans, which was always a plan in the long run, was to do a print run for a lot of our adventure books and make them better than we have in the past. We've only ever done them digitally, and we've always sort of done more minimal amounts of art for them, much more focused on the adventure and getting game masters up to speed to be able to run some of these games and use those tools within each of those adventures. But we want to take those adventures that we have, we want to edit and improve them. We want to add some new art assets to them, and then put them in some really nice physical copies as well. So that's one of our goals, and our stretch goals for this campaign. If we don't reach them, then that's going to end up being part of that next project there. And then we do have 2 more books for the Backwards universe. That's our goal after this. We wanted to do 6 total. Alex and I sort of, after we got Backwater funded, and the way that I was telling you earlier, we talked it out. What would we do? What are the main regions that we sort of want to hit up if we were to do a series? And we planned out 2 more. And if we are able to get these funded, these books funded, then those would be the next long-term projects that we would start working on. And again, the timeline all depends on whether or not we can get the Kickstarter to fund. But if we do fund, we might even start working on these in the background as we finish pulling together these two books as well. But I also know that there can be some pit stops along the way, so that's a long-term plan. Alex and I have a bunch of ideas for other games too, and we might pull some of those together in the meantime too. But it's all up in the air at this point in time.
Can we get a sneak peek at what those last two regions are going to be?
We've been playing it, keeping it. I don't know what the saying is. Keeping it close to the chest, playing it close to the chest a little bit. But I think we've sort of spoiled one already in a couple of different interviews. Folks keep asking, "Are you going to do anything with the Southwest?" And the answer is yes. We're going to have. It's just a little too hard to pass up. Again, there's lots of American Gothic fiction set in the Southwest, even more modern American Gothic, thinking about these, roadside hotels and how those feature into the sort of Americana of the American Southwest. But also you get the, Westerns and plenty of other sort of American fictional genres that play in there. So we are going to do one based out of the Southwest. And the other one we'll leave a mystery for now. But I think folks who are super familiar with our games can guess it. In fact, a few folks may have guessed it in the past already. So we'll see. But yeah, hopefully those two projects will be a reality too.
Awesome. Well, I'm not surprised by the Southwest being a thing, especially since you're a Stephen King fan, because you're going to bring in some desperation vibes and things like that. Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. I was actually more interested in if you were going to be doing whether it was going to be like Pacific Northwest or the Rockies or maybe even a hint at Alaska, which is the other place I've lived a big chunk of my life in. But I'll let you keep your secrets.
I will say we don't have plans at this very moment of doing something for Alaska, but we have, I would not a full book at least. And it would be cool, particularly thinking about Alaska and Hawaii and working with regional artists and collaborators to do sort of an expansion or a smaller sort of book in one of those settings, but no large book dedicated to those two, not at this point in time.
Understandable. If you do, it would be so cool to get especially native writers in on that, but maybe something for the gears to be turning on perhaps in the future. All right. I think that's all the questions that I had. Did you have anything else that you wanted to make sure we touched on before or in this podcast before we wrap up?
No, nothing about our games at this point in time, but I am always happy to come back on and talk more about Stephen King or other horror RPGs, because I do love trying to play as many of them as I can. Special shout out to the Alien RPG, which is just one of my favorite. And,
it's so good.
Call of Cthulhu is a special place in my heart too, as it does for many other folks. But there are other games that I enjoy too. But thanks for having me on. And again, be happy to come back sometime and talk about Stephen King or other horror fiction as well.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to do it. In fact, I'm probably going to message you right after we're done with this and be like, all right, we're going to schedule a Stephen King one and we're going to schedule a TTRPG one because these are a few of my favorite things. All right. So we've talked about the Kickstarter, but go ahead and give a shout out to like where we can find your stuff. And of course, I'll put this all in the description, but just for the people who listen to the podcast when they're on the road or whatever, and just to have them in their head, where can we find Backwards Tabletop and your games and all these goodies that we just talked about?
Yeah. So besides our Kickstarter, which is running right now for the Backwards Regional American Gothic Horror Series, you can find us at Backwards Tabletop on itch.io, as well as Backwards Tabletop at DriveThruRPG. We are at Backwards TTRPG on the platform formerly known as Twitter. And that's also our same handle at Blue Sky, if you're on Blue Sky as well. So yeah, connect with us. We'd be happy to chat TTRPGs in the land of social media.
Fabulous. And again, I'll have all of that information below, and I will update the links for the Kickstarter and all that as we hit that milestone. And if you want more horror media discussion, make sure you head over to SmallTownCreepy.com. Thanks for listening.